I like Malazan now. Hello and welcome back. My name is Sean, and today we're going to be doing a spoiler-free talk about Malazan Book 3, Memories of Ice. Today I wanted to give you guys my spoiler-free thoughts. There will be a spoiler talk version of this being released later this week, but as I started to jot down what I actually want to talk about, the list started getting longer and longer and longer, and I wanted to save you guys from an hour and a half video of me rambling, so we're going to cut this one up in a bit. This was the first Malazan book I would say I actively liked from beginning to end. It is the one that I would consider the most traditionally epic fantasy, so there is probably something with it, but something weird with getting through this book and starting to like the world is looking back on books 1 and 2. I appreciate them a lot more for what they were doing, and my thoughts on them are evolving as I get further down the series. Now I hear a lot of people say you don't experience Malazan until you read it your second time, and I'm finding as I'm just getting through the different books in the series, my thoughts are evolving and changing, and I'm starting to at least see the outline of what Steven Erikson is going for, and it's a lot. I'll give my general overview of my thoughts, kind of some of the things I noticed. I want to talk about what I absolutely loved about this book. Some things I not necessarily disliked, but they weren't my favorite. I think some of them could be, thought of as more of a feature rather than a bug. So I appreciate what happened there, but I still wanted to dive into some of that. And then also, what are my plans with this series moving forward? Would I recommend it? Do I want to keep going with it? Just general, would I recommend this to a new reader? Let's get into it. Like I mentioned, this was the first book in Malazan I would say I actually enjoyed from beginning to end. There's still some problems with just the sheer amount of information that's being shoved down your throat. It's very hard to just keep track of what's happening, and it's so dense. After you read a chapter, you honestly need to sit back and think oh well, this happened, that happened. I was doing chapter summaries at the end of these books, and it was okay, yeah, I got all the info. It's a lot, and it's not till you start to finish the book and revisit what happened in your head that you're getting the full scope of it. It's very interesting, but this, like I said, one of the probably more traditional epic fantasy takes that I've seen so far. You're getting a bit more exposition, you're starting to see the scopes of who the actual bad guys are. We're seeing a lot of talks of certain gods and ascendants being set up, and we're seeing what are the people playing in the background and actually seeing what the stakes of these conflicts are. In books 1 and 2, we definitely had who are the good guys, who are the bad guys. There's a lot of morally gray and a lot of kind of just people who wanted power or fighting for power, but you didn't have that necessarily conflict of good and evil. And in this book, you don't necessarily get that, but you're saying oh, I'd much rather have these people have power than what it's being hinted at this thing having power. And some of how this book is being set up, it feels like the way Steven Erikson built it, and I would love to hear more about how he actually did it, was he set it up almost like a D&D campaign, where he knew what he wanted to happen and the forces of plot that were going to drive forward, and he took a step back and let characters come in and experience what was happening. And it's really cool when you're diving into the head in his style of writing, because characters can die instantly. You don't know if they're going to become gods, what's going to happen with them. Some of them just disappear. There's no plot armor in Malazan, which is super exciting. I would just love to see, how this world was actually set up. It was very cool just to see, and now that I'm starting to get more understanding what's happening, we still haven't dived into everything, but you're getting fed just enough information to you kind of understand, and it's making the previous books make sense, so it's been pretty fun to go through. Overall, this was probably my favorite book to get through, and I think for me, it's what's locking in me to actually want to finish the series. It's not reading by any means, but now that I'm at least 3,000 pages into this giant series and I'm seeing the scopes, I really want to see how it's going to end. Now, some of the things that I really liked about this book was, now that we're on the third book, we were getting different casts of characters, and there's some overlap in different characters, but you can have these characters dropped in a single book, have them die in the same book, and you just really grow to love them. Some of the books I really love for the character-driven development, like the Dresden Files or some of the longer fantasy series, you're in these characters' heads for 20-something books. So you get to watch the growth. You truly get attached to the characters. You see them grow, and you're able to really feel those moments that make you care about the character. Erikson now in 3 books can get you super emotionally attached to these characters, and so when the characters actually die, it actually packs a punch. It's really cool, and it's just masterful how he's able to, drop you in one page, you're another character, and then 5 pages later, you're this character's the best. I stand this character super hard. I swear to God, if he dies, and then that character might die, and then you feel the punch, and it like actually makes these emotional impacts. So I would say that's been one of the strengths of Erikson, is that he is able to get you to care about his characters, and so when characters die or emotional things happen, like you really do feel like that emotion going through, and it makes for when they show acts of kindness or when tragedy happens that you're experiencing the full gamut of the range of emotion. Secondly, his world building is absolutely crazy. You know, this is a massive series, massive scope, and there's been other massive epic fantasy series that I really enjoy, but where Erikson really stands out for me is some of the things, when you step back and think about it, just how absolutely crazy they are. Just some of the things that seem normal. I believe in the last book, and I'll spoil this one because why would you watch the review of book 3 if you haven't read book 2? But, you know, you have the main characters running into a telepathic snake god, and, you know, they wind up just shooting it full of crossbow arrows, but the fact that there is just a giant sea snake trying to go there, and the fact that it can talk telepathically, the way it was set up was that it just seemed like a completely normal part of this world. And some of the characters and races that you get exposed to, like the Kachan Shimal, or however you pronounce that, you know, just to give that slight spoiler of what that race is, it's like you have these basically telepathic dinosaurs that have swords for hands. And it's such an absurd thing when you look at it objectively, but in the story it like absolutely fits, and it's really done well. Some of the big scenes that you have in this book, it's like you take a step back from what actually is happening, and you're like, holy shit, this is so absurd. But it never feels like that when you're experiencing it. Like, you have these really crazy, really imaginative world building elements, but they're fit so snugly in this world and they're done so skillfully that it's just super cool to see just how far some of these things are being pushed. You know, we're getting to 90s anime level, just pushing of just crazy ideas, and it absolutely fits, and I am all for it. And now that we're starting to get the big players of it, we're starting to see some of the more general themes that I've heard you guys talk about, and that's talked about a lot when we talk about Erikson. And that is part of the debate, is this grimdark or not? A lot of people argue it's not, because the main theme of this book is kindness. And now that we're starting to experience more and more of these characters and get more into their heads, it's a very dark and, you know, very off-putting world at times, but when you see some of these characters self-sacrifice and go for kindness, it's actually really exposing new things. Like this book especially, we started to see certain decisions made by characters, which their best decision maybe wasn't to be kind, it was to be the same kind of monsters that got them in this place in the first place. So with how there's no plot armor and these characters absolutely can die and get loose, like having them make the decisions anyway, just to self-sacrifice and to push that kindness, it is very like touching, and I think that adds like an extra layer to it, where when I'm starting to consider where Erikson like is with the rest of the authors, it's like these big emotional punks are just making them go higher and higher in my estimate. So really enjoyed how we handled that. And with that, just now that we're finally getting enough exposition where I somewhat know what's happening, you know, the world building and the scope of everything is absolutely massive and just amazingly cool. You know, in this book, we start to dive more into like what the Decker Dragons are, how they work, a little bit more about Warrens. Nothing's ever like explicitly explained, but all these really cool elements between like the gods, the ascendants, the soul taken, the just how everything's fit together, the world at large, you know, how everyone's finding themselves. We're getting more of the history of some of the things that were just like very briefly mentioned in books 1 and 2, and the scope of everything is so massive. And I know we've just like scratched the iceberg just seeing how far the series goes and how many unanswered questions I have, but oh my god, there is so much in this, and it's so big. And you know, some of my thoughts in book 1 and 2, which I didn't like, was not understanding what was happening. I will have to like finish the series to see if there's any other way that you could do it, but the sheer amount of what's been built and that's been presented there, I mean, I did a video on Spellmonger that so far it seems like a similar size and scope, but he just gives you all the information and you just spend like, you know, giant paragraphs and pages of explanation. Well, Erikson's obviously not doing that, but you know, I don't think you could do much other than either tell them everything or just like, you'll figure it out as you go on, you know, just keep trucking. All in all, this was the first book in Malazan, and I'd say I'd actively enjoyed. I appreciated the other books, and you know, it's probably going to make me push through the rest of the series. So I'm super excited, but this was the first entry in it where I was like fully invested from beginning to the end. I like the characters. I, I didn't necessarily know what was happening all the time, and I definitely had to go back on my review of this or taking the notes just to like, oh yeah, that happened, and it's like, oh, I missed that. So there's still a lot that's going in there, but you know, I really enjoyed going through this one. Now, to get into what I disliked. So part of that giant scope and things that I was just praising, the issue with that is that I cannot casually read these books. So one of the things I enjoy about reading is the escapism, the being able to just set something down and enjoy it and then just be swept off in the cool world. This book still very much feels like I'm doing homework. Having to go through the chapter summaries and like, you know, plotting out what's happening and all the different threads I have to keep in line, you know, the fact that you read the series twice just to fully understand what's happening. I haven't made up my mind if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Can see why some people enjoy that. You do get satisfaction as things start clicking in your head and everything starts to make sense, but that's still not necessarily what I like to do when I am reading. I like to read to escape. I work in fields where I am constantly mentally engaged anyway, so I don't need that to be from my source of fantasy. But I get why a lot of people like that. There is a lot to dig here, a lot to get put together, but just, it feels like it's impossible on the first read to really quite understand everything that's happened. And one prime example of this is I started watching a few of Critical Dragon's videos, and he's a professional editor, and he's talking about all the different tricks he has, just having his PhD in literally like fantasy literature. And you know, he is also missing some of these key points that he's having to go and reread and have people tell him like, oh, you missed that, you missed that, you missed that. So when you get to the level where, you know, the doctorates who hyper specialized in fantasy literature literally can't do the same thing either, you know, is that a bug? Is that a feature? I haven't quite decided, but it is a slightly off-putting. I read this book and I was like, okay, time for the summary read through. So I had to go through the 25 chapters, and it was still felt tedious to go through all the different chapter reviews, but completely necessary because there was a lot that I just hadn't had at the front of my mind. And when it takes you a month to read these books, you know, you're not going to remember everything. And maybe it's because of this, but you know, one of the other things that, at least for me personally, was there's a lot of horrific things that happen in this book. I'll talk about it more in my spoiler video. But needless to say, they are terrible and awful, and they're really dark and disgusting. And I know that because people mentioned how dark and disgusting and everything was when I was checking out other people's thoughts on this, and I had to go through. And I realized that I was getting so beat down with all the information, some of the critical, really messed up things that were happening in here, I had just glossed over it because as I'm trying to get through this and getting fire hosed with all this information, it's not, I didn't have some of these things land the way they did. When I took a step back and thought about what was actually happening, I was like, oh, that's completely fucked. But when the moment, it's like I'm not quite understanding what is happening. And that might just be because there's not a lot of breathing room in these. You're just so many different storylines, so many different things happening. But it wasn't until I started to reflect on the book that some of the things that I actually went through like truly landed. You know, one storyline in particular I got through and it was like, huh, that's weird. Like, why is like, you know, this guy like injured? And what had happened had been implied, and you know, they did kind of talk it, but it's not until you sit down and think about that situation the character was in that you would be able to fully appreciate, like, oh, this is some Stephen King level of fucked up. But yeah, I mean, part of this too, and this is going to, I think, probably be my recurring criticism. If you have to read through a series multiple times to fully appreciate everything that's happened, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? For me, that might be more of a negative thing. I like to reread series though. So it is fun to pick up a book, you know, a year later, and I definitely have books that I reread every year, or book series I reread every year. And I like going back to the same worlds and picking up new things, but I have the feeling if Malazan makes that list of my reread throughs, I'm going to be constantly picking up new things that I missed, and there will be little gems and stuff hidden. And, you know, that could be viewed as a good thing, because that means that there is a lot of rereadability enjoyment that would be in here. But that also means that as I'm going through the series the first time, there's probably major things I'm missing here. And that means that the writing wasn't done in such a clear way that I'd be able to, you know, fully pick up everything that's happened. And for me, that's a negative thing. For other people, that may be great. You know, if you are constantly running out of things to read and you have a series that you like, and you know every time you dip it in there, you're going to find little extra things in there, you know, that could be good. I know there's this idea of books being sacred in the way that when you read the book changes you. You go out in the world and then the world changes you, so when you come back to the book that changed you originally, you're now changed and you get back to the book, and now that book can change you in different ways because there's so many rich details and things in there that you weren't able to pick up because of who you are the first time. So Malazan might fit that case. I have to get through the whole thing to see how it's done to really fully do that. Book 3 in there, I am definitely intrigued though. Now, all that being said, what are my plans for the series and would I recommend this to someone else? So I am going to finish the series. I bought the books. I now am starting to enjoy it. I think I probably would have finished the series even if I didn't enjoy this book, just to fully understand the hype and dive into everything, and I'm a little bit of a masochist, so that's me. Not everyone likes the amount of suffering that I like. I got excited about this book, and now that I'm seeing what's happening, I'm invested to see how it goes. And just seeing what Erikson did as a writer is not necessarily the style of writing that I would do, but how he's building his world in this like closed box narrative world building style that he's doing. You know, he sold the book as a 10-book series, so he knew exactly the major things that were going to happen before he even got to writing it. So the level of foreshadowing and detail that he was able to pull off is just absolutely astounding. And so for me, just reading through this book, you know, I feel like some of these things I'm coming away with, I'm taking notes, and these are things I'm going to apply in my own type of writing style. So for me, that is awesome, and I'm super excited about that. And now that we're getting invested in some of these characters, understanding what's happening, the whole system is super cool, and I'm excited to see where it ends up. So I'll absolutely be finishing this. Would I recommend it to someone else? For me, in recommendations, I've had book series that have started amazingly. Like the first book is one of the best things I read. I'm so hyped up on the potential. It's different, and you know, then the author can't finish the book series. I won't name anything specifically. It's always such a huge disappointment for me when a book series, you know, starts, however, and it gets weaker and weaker and weaker, and they just cannot land the plane that they started. And in those cases, I just won't recommend the book to anybody. Like, I'll ask them if they read the first book, and if they have and not the rest of the series, I'd be like, good, stop there. Imagine it finishes awesome. Do not read further because they will ruin the books for you. And it's unfortunate, but 3 books in, I'm pretty sure Erikson can land this plane. But until I see exactly how it is landed, then I don't know if I would necessarily recommend it. It's a lot. It feels like homework. You know, it's not like easy reading that you just pick up and you're like, oh, that really flew by. It doesn't fly by. It's still very good, very masterfully done, but it does not fly by. So far, like, if I know people like to dig, they like having all this extra world building, they want something that they can constantly read through and pick out new things, absolutely, I'd recommend to you. You know, if you like playing D&D for the lore, if you're one of those people who goes and watches like hours and hours of like Warhammer 40k lore on YouTube, I'd recommend this to you. But if you know you are more casual or you like the type of epic fantasy that's been coming out recently where, you know, it's like the Sandersons, like the Butchers, where the way that the prose and everything's written is more in line with, like, you know, plumbing the ideas, just to take these ideas and give them out to you, and you can follow along with the story, and the story is the most important part of it, then, I don't know, right now I'm kind of on the fence on it. For what's being done, it's so spectacular and different that if you are a fan of the genre and you want to experience all the genre has, then absolutely check it out. But if you're just casually reading this because you like to escape and you like to just enjoy your reading, I don't know yet. I really don't. The first 2 books were a slog for me to get through, and I love this genre. And those were doing things slightly different from like what you would normally see in the genre. So I applaud him now for taking those chances, and it's led to a really cool payoff in this book. But it's like you have to get through 2,000 pages of what I would have considered to be normal standard staples of the genre just to get to something truly epic. And if we get to like book 10 and everything just spectacularly ends, and from what I hear there's a giant convergence later on, then absolutely. But until we get there, I can't truly just say, yeah, everyone should read Malazan. It's like, no. If you like that type of stuff, you should read it. But it's not easy reading. Hey, I had a good time with this. So if you've already read the first 2 books and you're intrigued and you want to see what happens, definitely pick up the 3rd one. Malazan as a series too is super interesting. Seeing just the sheer level of depth that is there, and seeing some of the other YouTubers or booktubers' reactions to this, where you have guys with literal PhDs and analyzing fantasy, just making hours and hours of content, going line by line by line. It's super cool. It's fun to be a part of, and I think that's part of the big appeal of this, is you have a giant fan base and everyone's just nerding out on what's happening, and there are so many different theories and stuff you can dig into. It's a lot's happening, so when you're getting into it, it feels like you're getting into something. But hey, I will be releasing the spoiler talk sometime later this week. Hopefully I can get that out by like Thursday or something, and then I can have another video come out like on Saturday. But I will be traveling again, going back from where I'm at in the holidays, so next time you see me, you'll be back in my normal setup, so don't worry, this isn't a permanent thing. And hopefully you guys enjoyed watching this. I'm going to continue going down through Malazan. It's probably going to take me a year to finish everything. I'll have some future more Malazan based videos that aren't related directly to book reviews. Now that I've done the first 3, I kind of want to have them in context of each other. But that's all stuff for another day. But hey, appreciate you guys staying and hanging around, and have a good one.